Okay, that's the recording started. So welcome everyone to this meeting of the Integration Joint Board. I rule that understanding orders 5.6 and 5.8.1. This meeting is being held by remote participation due to current restrictions and the impact on public attendance at meetings of the IJB. Whilst the public are excluded from attendance at the meeting under the terms of the Coronavirus Scotland Act 2020, members of the local media are in attendance via remote link. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and will be published online for public access after the meeting. Can all participants online please switch off their cameras and mute microphones when not speaking? If you need to speak on any point, please use the raise hand function in Teams or indicate your wish to speak by signalling on your camera or taking your microphone off mute. Officers are reminded to follow the protocols that have been separately issued with regard to their participation. Before we start the meeting, can I please ask the committee officer to do a roll call for members to indicate they are present?
Thank you. Natasha Cormack?
Here.
Jane Haswell?
Here.
John Fraser?
Good morning.
Emma MacDonald?
Present.
McGregor?
Present.
Sean Manson?
Here.
Non-voting members, Brian Chittick?
Present.
Carol Williamson?
Present.
Denise Morgan? No, I'll put in apologies. Edna Mary Watson?
Present.
Ian Sandilands? I'll put in apologies. Suzanne Gens?
Ian Sandilands is on holiday.
Okay. Suzanne Gens? I'll put in apologies. I see that Wendy Hand is present, so I'll indicate Catherine Hewson's apologies.
Yep, present.
And Jim Guyan.
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Lisa. Okay, we will now move on to the agenda. And do we have any declarations of interest, members? I'll just look around the room here, and I don't see anybody raising their hand. If anything does arise through the meeting, just make me aware of that and we can take that at any point. And if I could just remind you at the moment, if you could switch off your camera and mute your microphones if you're not speaking, that would be really helpful. Thank you. Okay, and if we could move on to confirm the minutes of the meeting held firstly on the 10th of September. Can I get someone to move those minutes? Moved by Robbie McGregor.
Second.
Yeah, Edna, did you want to come in on the minutes?
Yes, just to say that my job title is recorded inaccurately. I'm Chief Nurse Community, not Acute.
Okay, we'll get that amended. Thank you. So they've been approved. I'm not sure if you got that, Lisa. John seconded the minutes.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, and the minutes of the meeting held on the 24th of September.
Yeah.
Yep. John and Robbie again. Have you got your hand up again, Edna, or is it from your previous? That's fine. Thank you very much. Okay, before we begin today, members and everybody else, it's quite a large agenda. We've got 13 items on the agenda today. Some of them are quite big items. Whilst I'm really keen that we have a good discussion, lots of questions, lots of debate, could I please make a plea that we keep the questions IJB related and we keep them focused on what we're here to do. And in the day, I will plan a comfort break. So just we'll see how we get on and see what time that is. So for now, if we move on to item 1 on the agenda, and that's the Shetland Alcohol and Drug Partnership Annual Report, and that's Wendy McConaughey.
Good morning. Can I just check you can all hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Excellent. Okay, thank you for inviting me. So the Scottish Government requires ADPs to produce an annual report. This is a new template this year, and as you'll see, it's very prescriptive. The report contains a suite of indicators that show progress against the national strategies, the rights, respect and recovery, and the alcohol framework. I'd just like to highlight a key factor, I think, around alcohol and other drugs is just to highlight that it's not a standalone issue that only affects certain people or it's only for specific services to kind of focus on. It's something that cross-cuts almost all areas and affects people really widely. So I'll just give a couple of kind of key points from the report. So the kind of bits that I wanted to highlight as areas of work that the Shetland ADP had made progress on last year was the development of social media pages. We found that we've had excellent engagement with the social media and managed to get out lots of really important information through that channels. We also wanted the social media to be able to create something that kind of just would drip feed into people's news feeds and just kind of normalise discussion and debate around alcohol and other drugs. We carried out some public engagement activities, which was really good to do that kind of public-facing events. We developed and delivered a local training package that focuses on understanding and responding to alcohol and other drug use. So it goes a bit deeper than just looking at, you know, what alcohol or other drugs are and how they affect you, but looking at the kind of reasons behind and the complex issues that can come alongside that. We developed a health check that included drug screening questions. That was done in collaboration with Health Improvement. I think we've been asking about alcohol use now for a number of years, and people expect to be asked about alcohol use, but it's interesting and useful to be asked about other drug use as well as. We managed to roll out naloxone training last year, which was really positive, and of course the rapid response to COVID restrictions that was undertaken by the Substance Misuse Recovery Service. We were quite lucky in Shetland that we were able to maintain a good level of service for people accessing both Substance Misuse Recovery Service itself and community pharmacy. The areas that I'd detailed in the report for improvement was actually to improve our online presence. So we're looking at the development of a website, somewhere that we can publish all our papers and where we can have advice and links to other websites. Licensing in terms of protecting and improving public health, that's one of the outcomes that's detailed in the report. So that's an area that we'd like to work more on with partners. Including lived and living experience in the planning and provision of services. We have done, as I would say, we have done better in that in the last couple of years with involvement in forums and things. But there is no substitute for the voice of living and lived experience. So it's really important that we press on and increase that. We need to increase the provision of harm reduction interventions, just to make sure that we have a really comprehensive harm reduction service available to people. Support the development of recovery communities, and again support for children and young people affected by their own or another person's substance use. Parental substance use is a major factor for child protection concerns and child protection registrations. So that's something that we are looking to move forward on as well. So happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much for that, Wendy. Okay, members, I'll open up for questions. I'll keep an eye online, see if anybody raises their hand, and I'll just check in the room. Do you have a question, John?
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Mrs McConaughey, for your report. I have a number of questions this morning. Some will be quite brief. I'd be interested as a member of the IJB to learn more about the government directives on rights, respect and recovery. Would it be possible to receive a report detailing exactly what that entails, please, Mrs McConaughey?
Yeah, I can send you a full copy of the Rights, Respect and Recovery strategy, if that would be helpful.
Absolutely fantastic, thank you. That'd be great. The line was a little bit bad there, I apologise, Wendy. Did you say that there's plans to launch an Alcohol and Drugs Partnership website?
Yeah, that's right.
That's super, that's right. Second question, Dick. Third question, can I please request that all future Shetland Alcohol and Drugs Partnership be minutes of, sorry, I'll start again. Can I request please that all future Alcohol and Drugs Partnership papers, including minutes of meetings, be sent out as a matter of course to the membership of the IJB?
Yep, we can do that.
Thank you. Told you this would be easy. The next one says that the IJB Direction 2.13 substance misuse states that alcohol and drug services are included within the Integration Authority scheme. And your report does specifically state that there's a representation from the Integration Authority and elected members. Can you tell me who the representation of the Integration Authority is and what elected members sit on the Alcohol and Drugs Partnership?
Yep, so Brian Chittick is a member of the Alcohol and Drug Partnership, and also we had the chair of the licensing board present at Alcohol and Drug Partnership meetings. That's
perfect, thank you very much. And as a kind of follow-up to that, can you tell me why there's no third sector representation or lived life experience representation on the Alcohol and Drugs Partnership?
There is third sector representation, so I think I've missed that out, so apologies. In terms of lived or living experience, that tends to be at the Alcohol and Drug Forum level, and that forum feeds into the Alcohol and Drug Partnership. But as I said earlier about including lived and living experience, that's something that we certainly need to get better at, and we're looking at how we can include that in Alcohol and Drug Partnership meetings, sort of at that strategic level.
Thank you, that's satisfactory as well. Other questions with the considerable amount said about signposting to appropriate care and support for people that are seeking to enter into recovery. Just, what engagement does the Alcohol and Drugs Partnership and the Substance Misuse Recovery Service have with external bodies, in particular 12-step fellowships to support people that are... I recognise that everybody's definition of recovery is different. However, for some, abstinence is their definition of recovery, and it is evidence that, that a 12-step programme facilitates such an abstinence-based objective. What signposting is in place with external organisations that follow a 12-step programme?
I think AA and along with various sort of supports are that is a place that people will be signposted to. So people who are accessing the Substance Misuse Recovery Service will be signposted to AA, for example. GPs might signpost to AA, that kind of thing. With the development of the website, AA and other 12-step programs will definitely be included there as a place that people will support.
Okay, the reason that I've asked the question, Wendy, is that I'm aware of it's not just the AA. There's a whole tranche of 12-step recovery groups that are in operation within Scotland, and there's quite a number of the alcohol and drugs partnerships and health boards in other regions whereby there is active liaison officers with the 12-step support groups. There is general service officers for each of these organisations, and I just politely request that perhaps investigation be made as to how other organisations, particularly the Central Belt of Scotland, engage with the central service officers of these organisations to improve information sharing, particularly in light of the Zoom meetings that have exploded in recent months, where these support groups are much more accessible than they previously were. But we can speak about that another time.
Sorry, I was going to respond to that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it is different now that we have remote access to all these recovery groups. So it really was just AA locally, but obviously that's all changing when we have so much remote access, and you can access these support groups all over the world, should you wish to. I do have good kind of collaborative work on the other ADP through Scotland, so I'll be able to speak to some of my ADP colleagues in the Central Belt and see how they do that.
That's brilliant, thank you. And we'd like to know, finally, you said with regard to licensing applications, Wendy, that you'd like to see more focus be placed on evidence that applications and licence holders can meet the 5 licensing objectives at the point of application and continue to meet these objectives in the operation of their premises. You say that this has been raised with the licensing board, but unfortunately there's been no change to the process undertaken. I would like to request, if you're of a mind, Mrs McConaughey, and also with the blessing of the chair, that a joint meeting be arranged between the licensing board and the IJB in order that the Alcohol and Drugs Partnership can present their viewpoint on this, in order that we ensure that we do get the proper engagement from the Alcohol and Drugs Partnership on the licensing decision making. Because I'm actually quite disappointed to hear that there's been no change to the process undertaken to date. However, just yesterday's history, and there's a new chair that is yet to take up seat in the licensing board. Maybe a kind of opportune time in order to explore that, Emma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'll just that as well, John.
Right.
Did you want to come back in, Wendy?
Yeah, I was just going to say, licensing board, the local licensing board, we have raised the point of looking at the licensing objective, and we have an extra objective, which is the objective. I felt it's important, if we've got that objective, to make sure that we can show that people are meeting it. Some other areas in Scotland do have a kind of appendix to their sort of legal documentation that they need, and it's around meeting that 5 objectives. There's been quite a bit of work done nationally with Alcohol Focus Scotland, looking at licensing as well, so there is work ongoing with that.
Thank you very much. Do you have anything further, John? No. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions, members? Jane?
Thank you. Just in line with the IJB's website, and it's just as you're designing your website, I know our websites would host links across to your website. So I'd like to see that, as well as the Safer Shetland included within the Safer Shetland. It's that kind of one-stop approach, isn't it? But I just wanted to say it's good in that there's local awareness of the fetal alcohol syndrome disorder being raised, and your open peer work there. I think there's a lot of good work going on there, and that's an area that in the past has not been a light shone in it, so that's very, very positive. Thank you for your report.
Thank you for that, Jane. Anybody have any further questions or any comments at this stage? Any comments in the room? I'm looking, I'm not seeing any. I'm not seeing any online either. So thanks very much for your report, Wendy. I think it is really clear from this that alcohol and drug related harms do not just affect the individual, they affect communities, families, the entire thing. So it is right that it is considered by many different areas. So we have been asked to approve the Shetland Alcohol and Drug Partnership Annual Report for submission to Scottish Government and for publication. Are we happy to do that? I'm not seeing anybody say otherwise. Jane, do you have your hand to come back in, or is it just from previously? No. Okay. Okay, so nobody minds otherwise, then that has been approved. So thank you very much, Wendy. Okay, we'll move on to item 2, which is Shetland Islands Health and Social Care Partnership Quarterly Performance Overview, quarters 1 and 2, and that is Brian to present.
Thank you, Chair. I'll maybe start with just a little bit of an apology. That this is rather an unwieldy document and report, primarily because it does cover 2 quarters. But also I think it indicates the amount of KPIs that are being reported right across the Health and Social Care Partnership. And it also, I think, reflects the focus that we've got on our KPIs about performance, quality and risk. If I can just maybe go through some of the appendixes just to pick out some highlight points, Chair. But realising there's, you know, we're tight for time today. The directions, we've included the directions as part of this because one of our aspirations is to provide insight of performance against the directions and what the services have been directed to provide. And that's why we've used the directions template as a report. For the directions that were approved in July, we've attempted to align KPIs with performance and improvement plans. But those that were only approved at the last meeting, we've only annotated progress against the actual improvement plans. We're currently discussing how we can do better at our KPI setting, potentially when directions are being drafted so we can start the measurements straight away. But we're also looking at how we can make linkages right across the services where there are similar KPIs. And I give the example of the KPI for the percentage of assessments completed. That is right across the Health and Social Care Partnership, and we're trying to delve into a little bit more depth and break those down into individual services so we're more accurate in our reporting. We're also giving consideration to how we report performance on a qualitative, maybe telling some stories and some experiences of people who have accessed our services, as well as the quantitative KPIs which are outlined in the report. Appendix B is aligned to the Council KPIs and review sickness, and you know, it maybe just puts forward the point that despite COVID and the pandemic still being ongoing, there's not been a great significant shift in absence against the Q1 and Q2 for last year. Appendix C is our annual operation plan and our quarterly measures against that. Areas maybe for highlighting of good performance are clients waiting no longer than 3 weeks from referral to appropriate alcohol treatment that supports recovery. That's at 100%. Percentage of access to primary care professional advice on the day at any health centre in Shetland, that is also at 100%. The number of anticipatory care plans in place has increased significantly, partly due to the good work done during the response phase for the COVID pandemic. And also 84% of children in class primary 1 with no obvious dental decay. That has continued an upward trend in that statistic, and we're the second highest in Scotland with decay-free children in that age group. Unfortunately, only second to our peers down in Orkney. Appendix E highlights effects of COVID on some of our KPIs. You know, regarding complaints, and I think It highlights that we had a decrease in complaints during that period. And Appendix G indicates our ongoing review of the risk register, which will be coming to Audit Committee, IJB Audit Committee in February. And we're drawing up of a data sharing agreement to look at how we share the risk information as well as performance information better right across the Health and Social Care Partnership. So I'm happy to take any questions, Chair, if there are any reporting arising from this report. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Brian. Okay, we'll open it up to questions. I've got Robbie first in the room. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chivik, for that report. Could I take you to page 97 of the papers and I have a question around the increased resilience within local communities that review the model of service provision in remote areas. I understand there have been discussions in the past and there's a further meeting scheduled on this matter. I've had representations from constituents in Fair Isle who have great concerns around the rotational model. If I can cite my own experience, the first time I had the pleasure and privilege of going to Fair Isle, it took me 5 attempts to fly to the island. So there are concerns that a rotational model is going to present difficulties in getting staff members in and out of the island, and the potential knock-on effect as to where their next posting would be on the rotation calendar. Can I ask that these things be taken into consideration when these matters are being reviewed? Thank you, Chair.
Brian.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the question, Councillor McGregor. Just to maybe just put a pin in the map of just where we are with that kind of project. We've used this project to demonstrate and align ourselves to the small islands population localities with small island populations paper that was presented to IJB last meeting. And in that, we are undertaking engagement, community engagement and participation, looking at a model of a new model of care. That has been somewhat reactionary to the situation we find ourselves in with individuals moving on from their posts. But we've used that as a positive opportunity to start some of those good conversations with the communities involved, and that does include Fair Isle. But we are planning to meet all the non-doctor islands as part of that project. And we've had some really good sort of conversations and involved partnership working right across community development, Scottish Ambulance Service, Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, as well as the communities themselves. So we're really acknowledging as well that the different small island populations have different needs. And it's about growing a model in co-production with those individuals and those islands and those populations that suits the islands. And so we are committed to do that, and we're committed to understand that it has to be a model that suits those populations as well. So in answer to your question, I think we can really take forward what the point of the question being that it's got to be a model that suits individual islands, and certainly they are amongst the priorities that are being discussed at the moment in conjunction with the island communities.
Thank you, Brian. Let's come back in.
Thank you very much, Brian. I'm more than reassured by the content of your answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I've got Natasha next.
Thank you, Chair. I just have two things I'd like to pick up on. The first is in the public health update and the smoking rate target. Is this set by national targets? Because I note that we have a target of 5% by 2022. And I think my question around it is looking at the percentage rates that we are achieving over the last couple of years. It's been around about 13–14%. So is the 5% target achievable Because I think if we're setting targets, we need to make sure that whilst we need to strive for them, that they also are achievable.
I'll maybe refer that one to Elizabeth Robinson. Yeah, she's coming in.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chair.
Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Hello. I think that's a good question, Natasha. We set the target 10 years ago, so it is at the point of review. We are just undergoing, we know that our GP practice figures on smoking are, although they're much more up to date than they were a few years ago, they're not absolutely up to date. And we're going through a process just now, literally at the moment, of phoning all the people who haven't got their smoking status recorded. So I think within 2 or 3 months, we'll be able to tell you how close we are to that 5% target. And our review of our 10-year plan will help us to either say, yes, that is a realistic target, or no, we need to change it to something more realistic. And we are currently with the lowest in the country. So I am still hopeful, but I think it's probably unlikely that we'll meet the 5% target by 2022.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for that. It's okay just to go on to my next question,
Yeah,
Chair? Okay, the next question is around, it's on page 159, alcohol brief interventions, one of my subjects I come back to the it states that the number of ABIs undertaken is high, yet in the first 2 quarters of this year, actually, it only records 12 being undertaken. So the numbers don't really bear out against the narrative. I think ABIs in the reporting, it's something that the IJB we keep coming back to, and for some reason I'm not sure that we're collecting quality data here to be able to inform our strategic decision making in this area, and it's something that it concerns me. We don't know how many is being undertaken truly, and we don't know how effective they're being as well. So I think in turn that when that comes to the IJB to issue our directions around this, I'm not sure that we have the information to do it appropriately.
Thanks, Natasha. Do you want to come back on that, Brian?
I'm happy to start off. I see Elizabeth's also got her hand up. I think that I was going to talk about ABIs and the fact that I think that demonstrates the complexity of gathering data right across the partnership, and the fact that there are a lot of services that are undertaking this, but there's no one central system that collects that data that we can then produce to get an accurate picture for what you're asking about, what's being done. So we surmise that it is being done. If I look parochially amongst the dentists, I know that they are doing that at every checkup, because that's a professional kind of ask of the team that they're doing that, and smoking as well. But it's then, how do we get that data from a dental system into a system that we can collect that data quite accurately as well? So I was going to use ABIs as maybe one of those areas that just, where is commonality across a lot of the services that we're doing this activity? How do we measure, but not just measure, but actually record that in an area that we can actually get that information? And I did actually have a conversation last week with Wendy McConaughey discussing just along those lines. Can we make it a little bit more simple? That would, aid the data collection. But I think it is a little bit of a wicked issue, and just so many different systems being used. How do we draw that actual data out? Because it is important data, as you say, to inform service delivery and to reflect the preventative work that we're doing, because we're always saying that prevention is better than cure. So I don't know if Elizabeth would want to add on to anything I've said there.
Just to support everything that Brian has said, so we do think they're happening, but we have a real issue in terms of recording of data. In terms of the evidence, there was a lot of research done about 12 15 years ago about evidence of effectiveness of ABIs, but one of the things we have been asking Scottish Government and Public Health Scotland for is updated evidence review of effectiveness, because we've now got many years of experience of delivering this as a programme across Scotland. So it's time to have a review of what effectiveness levels, and I think that would be helpful in terms of reviving the drive towards delivering ABIs and recording them as well, if we had that updated evidence base.
Thank you.
Any further questions, Natasha? No? Okay, thanks very much. John?
Thank you, Chair. Mrs. Robertson's actually just answered my question. It's the ABIs were the bane of my life 10 years ago. My feeling at that particular time is that there wasn't particularly the buy-in from clinical colleagues, and there wasn't significant evidence back then to identify whether they resulted in positive outcomes that they were designed to achieve. So I was going to ask for a review. Mrs. Robinson's on the ball. That she's looking to seek from Scottish Government an update on their effectiveness. So I'm content with that. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Lisa has her hand up. I don't know if you want. Do you want to come in on this, Lisa?
Yes, if I may, please, Chair.
Go ahead.
It's just a point around the information that's in there. What it says is that the number of ABI screenings is high. And what that means is the number of times that patients are being asked about their alcohol intake, but depending on those answers, that might not translate into a full ABI being requested. And I think that links back to the point that Natasha made about it saying that it's high, but the figures are low. That's because the number of people who are asked about their alcohol intake is very high. If you go for any sort of appointment, a long-term condition check, etc., then you'll be asked about your alcohol intake. But depending on the response, that might not then translate into an alcohol brief intervention being required. So it was just to make that distinction. I hope that makes sense to members.
Yeah, no, it does. Thank you very much. Did you want to come back at all, John? Or
No.
Okay, you're okay with that? Okay, I've got Shona next.
Hi, thank you. To be honest, most of the things I was going to ask in relation to alcohol brief interventions has now been asked, because as Natasha pointed out, this is something that has kept coming back. So I'm really pleased to hear what Brian was saying about the work that's going to be going on and the conversations that's been had with Wendy. So and that a review is going to be undertaken, because I think it is absolutely crucial that we get the data and the evidence there. So thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you very much. Any further questions? Anyone? Jane?
Thank you. I have one or two, so if it's okay, I can just ask them. Is that all right? Thank you. So just going back to Brian's point, I really do see the change in direction, and I think it is coming together in that way of the improvement plan, the projects, resources and deliveries, and the directions are moving in the right direction. What I was also interested in was the risk management team's involvement in that as well. I suppose my additional ask, which I've kind of highlighted a few times before, is when there's particularly the community-led support, which is IJB's. It's a fundamental project that we have supported with our partners. That there is more of a reflection in the improvement plans, whether that's an extra column. I apologise for suggesting that, but I think there needs to be more linkage to the major change of direction that the community-led support programme is pulling. But that's just I'll move on to my questions now. In terms of the adult social work, can I just ask if it would be possible for a short briefing on what I think is an exciting development of the commissioning of services reflecting and that's looking at social enterprise, etc. So not for this meeting, but if possibly out with this meeting, we could have just a very brief update, just where that question, where that is actually at. So would that be possible?
Brian?
Absolutely, Chair. Jane, that would be possible. So we'll look into that out of this meeting for you.
Lovely. Thank you very much. And then looking at the adult services, could I just ask a question? Clearly, we've got the transition report coming to March. One of the improvement plan talks about exploring and implementing, different options. But can I just ask? Obviously, COVID has, through the summer leavers from school, I'm particularly thinking about that side, transitioning into adults, so coming under the IJB. Has there been support to access Eric Gray for that group of children who had a transition in this COVID time, where Eric Gray would be the option that they have chosen? Has that still been possible through the COVID new admission? Thank you.
I think Claire has her hand up. If that's okay, Brian, I'll let Claire come in first.
Thank you, Chair. I can confirm we're currently supporting 2 young people in transition, and I think there are a number of others identified. So the transition work has continued. However, the legislation that guides how we deliver our day services has been heavily impacted, as you know, on what we can deliver as in response to the pandemic and safe delivery of services. I did meet with the staff this week at Eric Gray and New Craigielee, and they are continuing to do their reach into schools to support those transitions. At the point where an individual transitions out of children's services and education, then of course they become part of the adult services allocation, and all adults who have chosen in-house services under their SDS options are currently impacted by a reduction on service. A number of individuals are being supported by their social workers to explore other options under all 4 options of SDS. And I know another, obviously don't want to get into speaking about low numbers, but that work has continued in young people that are transitioning from school as well. So I think there is information that parents have to understand that in adult services, and obviously when an individual leaves school, they are deemed to be an adult, and unless there's other legal mechanisms in place, the young person can obviously make their own choices and decisions. If guardianship is in place, then of course that those individuals will be supported in the choices under SDS. But just to confirm your original question, the young people that are eligible for transition are being supported. Schools have made a concession to supporting young people up to their 19th birthday. But for those that have reached that stage and have chosen in-house services under their SDS options, the work has commenced for their transition, to support their transition into Eric Gray and New Craigielee.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. I've got Peter who wants to come in. So if that's okay, Brian, I'll let him in.
Yeah, I was just going to add to what Claire was saying in terms of there has been an awful lot of work undertaken between both services, and actually just over the last couple of days we've been liaising about bringing adult services and adult social work together to extend that kind of conversation. I think it'll be an important point when we meet in January to really have a full reflection on the last 8 months or 10 months as we'll be heading into at that point. And to kind of pick up on some of that learning. I mean, we've increasingly been looking at adapted services and utilising the full range of self-directed support. And I suppose just to kind of pick up on your initial kind of question to Brian, there has been ongoing dialogue with the National Development Team for Inclusion, and we do have an outline of a proposal to kind of really, I think, take the conversation back into the communities to see what local people and the communities want from services, rather than us maybe having fairly fixed views on the routes that we feel that we should be going down to kind of develop. So that will hopefully be discussed within our Directorate Away Day tomorrow. I'm still hoping that Bill Love from NDTI can attend that, but we do have the outline proposal, which I'm sure will be taken to the IJB in due course, because it will be important that IJB members are also part of that conversation going forward as well.
Thank you for that, Peter. That's really helpful. I don't know if you want to add anything, Brian.
Yes, thanks, Chair. It was just really add on to what Peter was saying. He said a lot of maybe what I was going to answer for the first question, but just to say we did have a discussion at Performance Monitoring Group this week about how we're going to link the strategic plan with the directions, but maybe we look at some priority areas that we would expect to see some activity in everybody's directions across the Health and Social Care Partnership. So community-led support could be one of those. Other ones that we looked at was maybe poverty or inequalities or things like that. And that's really how then we start to nudge that kind of alignment with the strategic plan via the issuing of directions. But just to say, we'll be discussing that tomorrow as a Health and Social Care Partnership Executive Management Team kind of in our away day tomorrow, and how we're going to make those linkages and maybe draw out priority areas.
I would really support that. I think that's an excellent way for the IJB's directions to be used to, as you say, keep that focus on there. And thank you all for your responses there. It was just as we go to change, we have to make sure that the people currently requiring that the change hasn't caught up with yet. We need to ensure that we're, as the IJB, protecting that group at this time. So I'm assured by that. Thank you. Great to see Autism and Ageing programme as well. That's fantastic. And I will finish now just to say that the community care resources and the community nursing directions at previous meeting, I think it was the 24th of September, it was agreed to include the wording long term into that very first in the improvement plan in the first column. So it was just to highlight that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Jane. Do we have any further questions on this, members? No, I'm not seeing it. I've got a really quick question. It's on psychological therapies, and I know that there's a recovery plan in place, but I was just asking, my question, I suppose, is could we please be kept informed of how this recovery plan is progressing with regular briefing updates to the IJB, just to ensure that it is going the direction we need it to go?
Absolutely, Chair. Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah, that's fine. Any further comments then, if we've done questions? Does anybody have any comments on this paper? I'm not seeing. Oh, Peter.
Apologies for coming in. I was trying to find it on the bit, but I was just wanting to clarify with Jane about the bit about long term that she just mentioned in the community care resources, because I think it might relate to something that I just want to check out with her in terms of understanding.
I believe it's it was when we were discussing the improvement plans, it was just to add the term long term, because clearly, although we're also looking at very different ways of providing respite, we will still, it was recognising that respite wasn't necessarily reducing, whereas the long-term admissions for long-term stay would reduce, and it was just to change the wording, and that was agreed at the directions when we discussed the directions to change that first one. So I hope that has explained it. It's just adding that long. The wording is in the minutes as to what we agreed.
Yeah, okay. No, I remember the conversation, and I suppose it was just about, I think perhaps just in terms of what's been developing in the practice that's been developing, I think there may be a need to extend that conversation just in terms of the increasing levels of support at home and if you like respite at home that's been delivered within the community. And I suppose an extended conversation at some point in the future regarding the continued flexible use of care centres, which has really been brought under the focus during COVID, would be helpful. And the steps that have been taken to avoid unscheduled care. So I suppose it's just a little point of caution from my point of view, as adult social work that tend to input into that service, if you like.
Okay. Has anybody got anything else they need to say on that paper, or are we happy to move on? So we've been asked to comment and review on any issues and note the delay in reporting Q1 performance due to the COVID-19 pandemic response. I think we all absolutely understand and appreciate the reasoning behind that. And are we all happy to do that? Yeah, I'm not seeing anybody say anything other. Okay. Thank you very much for that. So we'll move on to item 3, which is the Anchor project update, and Jordan Sutherland is presenting on this one.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. I've put together some slides to help me introduce this report, so I'll just share my screen. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll introduce this report in my role as a member of the project team, and I'm also joined by Emma Perrin, the project manager for the Anchor project, who authored the evaluation report. So the Anchor project is a partnership project, and it's one of the key projects under the people priority of the Shetland Partnership Plan. And we were successful in securing 4 years of external funding from the National Lottery Community Fund. During 2018, so from September 2018 to March 2019, we had a set-up period for the project when we recruited the project officers and set up the board. And direct work with families commenced in April 2019. So this report focuses on the period from April 19 to March 20. The project objectives are highlighted here on this slide, and they're also at 2.3 of the covering report. And the evaluation is structured into 2 broad themes: family-led activity or co-production and system change. So the underlying assumption when we made the application for the funding was that there would be an overall reduction in spending on public services, and this graph illustrates visually what we're trying to achieve during the period of investment from the National Lottery Community Fund. So we're working to achieve a shift from crisis-led intervention to effective early action and prevention, ensuring that people get the right help at the right time. And the project also links some of the findings from Scotland's independent review of the care system for children and young people. So during the first year, activity was focused in the Sound primary school catchment area. So the project officers were based there for some of their time and built up relationships with the staff team there. And this is summarised at 4.2 of the report. Direct work with families on average, each family needed about 11.2 hours of support. And the types of things that the project officer supported families was predominantly the adults in the household, and it was around benefit claims and income maximisation, linking them into employment support, support with relationships, and also support with parenting. And there were some wider indirect impacts of the work in the Sound School. So there was an increase in the uptake of free school meals, and that's summarised at page 210 of the pack. So looking ahead, during the coronavirus pandemic, schools were we were unable to carry on delivering the project in the way that we had been, and we were anticipating that there would be an increased need once schools returned. So we looked at what we could do to accelerate change, building on the learning that we had for the first complete year of the project. And what we've done is linked a worker to each school, and we're using the term early help. And the idea is that each school will have some dedicated resource to provide early intervention for families who are needing a bit of support in light of the pandemic. We've also reviewed the role of the project board. So the Anchor board has agreed in principle to become a programme board with oversight of the Anchor project, but also the Emotional Wellbeing and Resilience project, which is a council-funded project in children's services, and also community-led support, recognising that there are synergies between the three projects and best use of resources and maximise the impact of the projects. So I'm happy to take any questions that you have on these reports, and I'll be joined by Emma Perrin as well.
Thank you very much for that, Jordan. Okay, I'll open it up to questions, members.
Thank you very much, Emma. Thanks, Jordan, for your report. Couple of questions. I'm struggling to get my head around this a little bit. Can I be absolutely up front as to what's happening? £321,000 has been secured over a period of 4 years. That's £80,250 per year. In the first year, we've managed to engage with 6 families. That works out at £13,375 per family. But on average, we only engage with them for 11.2 hours. That comes to £1,194 per hour. What's the people that are being employed by the project doing for the rest of the time? And where's the money going?
Do you want to come back in on that, Jordan?
Yes, I can do. So the project officers have got various roles in addition to their direct work with families. So that's highlighted in the report. There's the direct engagement with families, and then there's also supporting the systems change aspect of the work. So looking at the existing services and how we can shift the resources that we have towards early intervention and prevention. And they also support the project board to maintain oversight. So there's various roles that the project officers carry out.
Thank you. I saw Denise had her hand up. So Denise, do you want to add to that?
Yes, so it's just to say that part of the funding bid was as a research project to look at the systems change. That's just what Jordan's mentioned there. And part of the direct family was in relation to the research project. It's been really quite successful, and the board itself and the way it's worked together to address some of the issues has gone quite well, and we've had some really good outcomes. I suppose if Councillor Fraser wants further information on this, we could give it to him offline, as it's normally governed by the Education and Families Committee. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Denise. And Emma, did you want to come in as well?
Yeah, I suppose it's just to add that the evaluation report that is the appendix is now about 9 months old. So in the first year, it was in relation to those families, in addition to what Denise and Jordan said about the wider systems change. I suppose in terms of figures, we were then sort of not put on hold in terms of COVID, but the project officers was diverted to support the support hub, the coronavirus support hub, and phoning out to people on that list using that same approach about early intervention and supporting people to access services. And now they're supporting through the early help team many more families than the 8 that's reported in the first year.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you everybody for your response. To me, I personally define success as making fundamental changes to people's quality of lives. And we've touched 6 families for a total of 11 hours for each of them in a year. I'm struggling to see how that's a success, and actually we're looking at saying that we've helped them with benefit claims and relationship support. Is that not what Citizens Advice Bureau and Relationship Scotland Shetland do? But I'll be interested to hear what Mrs Morgan provides me of out of the meeting. But thank you.
Thank you. Elizabeth, did you want to come in?
Thank you. It was just to underline, I think, the fact that this is about transforming whole systems. So the work that is being done with the individual families is then used to reflect on the way we as services work with people. There's a huge amount of work that's happening behind the actual contact with the families, and I believe it is absolutely visionary and absolutely transformational in terms of what it's trying to achieve. And I think we also need to recognise the long-term nature of that. And I would ask Councillor Fraser to have patience and trust us and believe in what we're trying to achieve. And I do believe that it will have substantial benefits for Shetland.
Thank you for that, Elizabeth.
Trust and patience is never in doubt. Trust you implicitly, Elizabeth.
I'll maybe ask my question now that kind of maybe relates. I suppose, Jordan, my question is on, so we have this funding for 4 years. How do we ensure that we make the shift during this period of investment to really prioritise this early intervention approach? How do we shift this from a one-off project to something that is ingrained in what we do?
Yeah, well, I'll start in response to that, and Emma might want to add to what I've got to say, but that's something that we've been focused on right for the outset of the project, and that was why we spent the time establishing the board, because the board will have a really key role in terms of the shift in spend, because that's where the resources sit, and it needs to be a whole systems approach, as Elizabeth said. So we've got broad representation for a range of partners on the project board, and the role of the officers is to do the co-production work with families and to generate an evidence base to support the shift. So that is fundamentally what we're trying to achieve, is to provide the evidence base to shift the spend towards early intervention and prevention.
Thank you very much, Jordan. Does anybody else have any further questions? Jane?
Thank you. Yes, I support, it's a good report, and I support the additionality part of the actual report. I think that was a really useful part of that report. I suppose I just want to clarify with Jordan, when you talk about the board, within the actual 4.9 of the paper, it talks about the anchor project board, but it isn't a specific anchor project board, is it? Or is it a project board that's going to oversee the community-led support and the emotional well-being and resilience? Just clarifying around that, because it's a capacity issue. That's really my question.
Yeah, apologies for that, Jane. I could have made that clearer in the report. So for the period of the evaluation, from April 19 to March 20, it was the anchor project board. But what we've agreed is that actually there's synergies with these other change projects, and it would be useful to actually have one programme board that looks at all three, so that will evolve into something else.
Thank you, and that was my capacity issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Peter, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I was essentially going to cover just what Jordan said there. I mean, we, from the community-led support perspective, I think we recognised, certainly this time last year, that there was synergy between ourselves and Anchor. And I think I've said in maybe previous seminars, we began those conversations with the Anchor team, the workers, towards doing that joint test for change really in Bray. So that was identified fairly early on, and then those conversations have extended during the kind of COVID period, and as Jordan's mentioned earlier, the decision to move towards one overarching programme board was from a series of 3 workshops, fairly intensive workshops, including the board and officers involved in that. And I think that's sensible in terms of exactly what Jane was saying there, in terms of capacity, resources, both in terms of the cash, but more importantly in terms of people. So there's a group of officers chief officers leading on the governance and accountability around about that, and that will take forward in the new year. So I think that will really help all of these projects on at pace, and I think that's the most sensible way forward.
Definitely, thank you very much for that. I think the joined up project board is definitely the way to go. I'm not seeing anybody else coming in with questions. I mean, I understand John's concerns when you're talking about what is potentially small numbers that are benefiting, but I think we have to think of it as much wider than that. I think the impact that this has is going to reach far more people, and it's not just the people that we're helping, it's the we're learning from these families as well, to how we change the system so that we are focused on early intervention and prevention, and that's absolutely the right thing to do and what we're all wanting to do. So I really welcome this report today. I know we considered it at Education and Families, possibly earlier last month, I think. So I really thank Jordan for coming with this today. Sorry, Peter, did you want to come in? I missed you with your hand up.
Apologies. It was again. I think you've made a really important point there. It's about the test for change approach. There's no point in going in whole scale and discovering further down the line that you're taking the wrong path. So this is about learning small scale to fully upscale as time goes on, and that was my understanding as part of the Anchor project board was to do that so that it could impact on that systems change that everybody's recognising is needing to be done. So although it seems small scale, it's really important to do that learning so that if you are taking a wrong turn, you can kind of reflect on that and then look to really take that a kind of wider systems change over the course of the next couple of years.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, do we have any further comments on the Anchor project update, Jane?
Just to say, yes, I absolutely agree with that. And going back to Brian's point about, focusing in on particular change issues, I think that again highlights how important this project board is. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think we've got to have faith that we are doing the right thing here. Focusing on early intervention and prevention is not going to give results overnight. We have to be mindful that this is a longer term project and we've got to put our faith in it, and I think it'll do great things. So we have been asked to note it. Are we all happy to note? Yeah, okay, thank you very much. So we'll go on to agenda item 4, and that is Shetland Public Protection Committee annual report, and that's Denise.
Thank you, Chair. I'm presenting this report today on behalf of Kate Gabb and Tam Bailey of the Public Protection Committee. This report advises the board of the work undertaken by the Shetland Public Protection Committee during 2019-20. The committee's remit covers both adult support and protection and child protection, It oversees the quality of work undertaken by services across Shetland, highlighting good practice, areas of development, and ensures protection guidance is reviewed and updated. It also has a focus on societal issues such as domestic abuse, poverty and substance misuse that affects lives and restricts opportunities. These issues are also reflected in the reasons for children's names being placed on the Child Protection Register and feature in many adult protection investigations. This is the first full year of the Joint Committee, and it has managed to balance the needs of the two previous committees without too much difficulty. The main work of the committee is undertaken through a series of subgroups, including protection in the community, digital safety, financial harm and training. Some of the activities undertaken during the past year include a development day in March that was led by young people from the Open Peer project, Who Cares Shetland and the Young Ambassadors Group. This was a great success and the learning helped form the development plan for 2021. A review of adult risk referrals and an audit of decision making in respect of children whose names had been placed on the Child Protection Register was completed, and this highlighted consistent use of procedures, good decision making and appropriate assessment of risk. There was a comprehensive review and update of adult protection procedures, and the Safer Shetland website was actively maintained. Training has continued with a greater focus on e-learning modules for easy access by voluntary and third sector organisations, and we participated in the Anti-Bullying Week and the development of bystander training, which empowers people to feel able to take action safely if they see anything that is abusive or harmful. The Internet Safety Group have focused on the best ways of spreading safety messages for young people and parents in place of existing leaflets and supported activities for the Safer Internet Day. The Financial Harm Subcommittee has continued to lead on the Scam Busters project, highlighting scams occurring within our communities. The report also references statistical data in relation to protection, and this was discussed at an earlier meeting when I presented the Chief Social Work Officer report. The number of children and adults who are subject to formal protection measures remains relatively stable, but we have seen a significant increase in adult referrals that do not meet the formal measures. However, all individuals who are referred receive advice and support as required. That's all from me, and happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Denise. Okay, we'll open it up for questions. Any questions on this one, members? Pause for a moment to give people time to put their hands up. Jane.
It's comments really, but it's Denise. I'm sure that Shetland's really at the forefront of combining the reporting, isn't it, for adult and children's. We're really at the forefront of that, so I think that's really important to highlight that, because that's really good. And highlight again the Safer Shetland website is absolutely fantastic, and I think the ADP, if that was also included, because you've got domestic abuse in there as well, and I think if ADP was looking for a link for their websites as well, that would be really good. I think it's a model for what we're all grappling with in the IJB, which is about participation from children and young people, and also adult participation. And I think that there's a lot in your report from that. And I think the comment from one of the participants in the workshop that the children had the ability to cut to the core issues, and I think that really has to be the way forward for that. I like the initiative of looking at peer advocacy and peers in learning difficulties, and I would just include In Control Scotland have a lot of experience in that area, and I think that could be the next focus from the child participation moving into adult participation, and I was really heartened to see that progress is being made with that, and I congratulate you on your report.
Thank you very much. Okay. Any further comments or questions, members? No? I'm not going to add anything because I think Jane has summed it all up very well. It's a really good report. Thank you very much, Denise. And we're being asked to note. Are we all happy to note? Yeah, okay, we'll move on to agenda item 5, and that is the update report on adult services, and that's Claire Scott.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. The report presented provides members with an opportunity to review the work that has taken place to progress adult services, learning disability and autism, assertive community transition service at an early stage of its establishment. The Assertive Community Transition Service, also known as ACT, has been established to deliver a local provision of direct, flexible and intensive level of care and support to people who have learning disabilities and complex needs, where significant difficulty is being experienced and there's high risk of breakdown of current arrangements. The fundamental outcome of the service is that wherever possible, no young person or adult with learning disability and complex needs who require statutory services is placed off island. People supported by ACT could not typically have their needs met by other current in-house learning disability or mainstreams. In addition to learning disability and complex needs, people using this service may have emotional, learning and/or social issues and associated behavioural challenges requiring an enhanced intervention to understand, support and prepare them to be able to and manage life transitions. However, with time and following intensive asset-based and individual support, people can and do move on to more independent life. People requiring support from the ACT service can include young people in transition from children's services and education, adults with learning disability and/or complex needs experiencing significant change, and people requiring repatriation from off-island placements. Thank you. That's a summary of the update and the more detailed report that I've presented in front of you. I'm happy to take any questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Claire, and thank you for your report. I think it was Jane that requested the report came here today, but I think it's been really welcomed. It's an area that is important, and it's important that we get the updates on. So I'll open it up now for questions. Jane.
Yes, and thank you, and thank you, Claire. I do appreciate that this was extra on top of what is a very busy time. I do think, picking up on Peter's point earlier about checking and checking that the change is in the right direction. I think that was part of what this request was for. There's a lot of information within the report, and I thank you for that. And it's the issues around workforce, around the model of the housing, etc. And I think perhaps we're talking very small numbers as well. So I think perhaps out with the meeting, it might be useful. Now we've got that baseline information, I think it might be useful for the IJB and at some point in time to have a follow-up about this. But I think it's really important to have this early information of what is again, a really aspirational and exactly what the IJB was looking for. So thank you for this report, and we'll see outside maybe. Outside the meeting, I should say. Sounded terrible.
Thanks for that, Jane. I'll let Claire back in, but I think that's a really good point, and I think it's something that we could maybe pick up in a seminar, so we can really focus on it and kind of explore some of the detail, because there's a lot of information in this report and there's a lot of areas that could potentially be challenging, so I think it is something to maybe pick up so we can focus on. So go ahead, Claire.
Thank you. It was thank you, Jane, for that and the support. And yes, I obviously had to be careful about the information that I was able to include. Listening to Jordan and Denise's reports just prior to this report, there are a huge number of linkages and synergies with the other early intervention and prevention projects, and it all links into the same better outcomes when we're supporting people and being involved to support people and families at an early stage to avoid crisis and provide the right support. So yes, I would welcome that ongoing conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
I should also say it's been an important test of change, linking into Peter's comments in relation to we had an immediate need. We've been supporting that need and managing that need, and we have there's been learning in that process that we'll be able to apply to the future iterations as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you want to come in, Peter?
Yeah, I think this has actually been an important joint piece of work between adult social work and adult services as well, in terms of identifying a need and a need to explore alternative ways to support young people on island. I mean, it interlinks with so many of the other strands that's been discussed. I mean, Jane's highlighted issues previously regarding transitions and the work that requires to be done there, as Claire mentioned, in terms of having a kind of wider, earlier input. But it also identifies key pressures, I guess, demographically going forward as well, that we really need to be focused upon, so that we are continuing to look ahead and future-proof and developing a range of opportunities locally that is going to support young people and their families to remain on island in their own communities. And I think this is an important step in the right direction, albeit that there are, you know, some challenges, and we continue to try and kind of work on those.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, is everybody happy that we note the progress with regard to providing this report? Everybody content with that? Okay, I would propose now, we're moving on to item 6 in a minute, that we take a comfort break for 5 minutes and then we reconvene to item 6. Is everybody okay with that? Yeah. Yep. Okay, so I'll come back at 5 minutes from now.
Half past.
Well, nearly half, yeah, just before half past. Okay. Hi, Anne. That's us back and ready whenever everybody else is ready. Hello, everybody. Are we all ready to recommence?
Yes, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so we're on agenda item 6, and that's the Health and Social Care Partnership Joint Strategic Commissioning Plan refresh, and Lucy Flaws is presenting that one.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. Okay, I'll just get started on this one. So this is the refresh and review of the progress of the Joint Strategic Commissioning Plan for 2019 to 2022. So this the refresh or kind of consultation on the plan took place entirely online because of current restrictions. There are invites to the public, to the workforces of both parties, wider services, and there were some online workshops and individual feedback via email and also through kind of discussion with other people. There was really helpful and meaningful feedback and dialogue through the consultation process that I found really helpful, and that's going to be continued through the strategic planning group as we move into the kind of action plan process of what we need to do. There's real consistency of quite a lot of points that have been raised over the past 5 years, as far as I can gather, and that were also anticipated at the beginning of the integration process, which I think tells us that we need to look at doing things differently when these points keep coming up. And things have moved ahead in the world of services and improvement plans, but maybe the kind of process around communication, participation, engagement, and a kind of strive for clarity seems to be something that's a recurring theme when we consult on plans and documents. There's a recognition that we need to learn from COVID and also review the needs of the community in this kind of over this next year with the various changes that have taken place, and look at things as a whole community and also at a locality level over this coming year. Some key themes identified fit in well with the current strategic plan. So there's a kind of largely an agreement that the priorities are solid and that what we're working towards still stands even in light of COVID. But there are things that we still need to work on. And there were lots of good positive working examples of areas that have where change has occurred and where there's really good joint working. So I think it brings a good opportunity to share some success, to recognise the hard work of different services and communities and IJB. So within the cover report, there's a proposed action plan that will hopefully be worked up with by the strategic planning group if we're happy with that. And that largely hangs around having a period of reflection and information gathering, both at a service level, kind of learning from changes that have taken place over the pandemic, and also looking at needs of service users, and also at a Shetland or a system level, looking at a needs assessment of the whole community, which I think is a planned piece of work within public health and health improvement. And also looking at the strengths that have come out of the pandemic that I think have been identified within communities quite widely and really come to the fore. I think there's some work to do around looking at the system and mapping out the system and links between sectors and services that has come up in a couple of prior reports today already, seeing how things interact. I think we need to, while it's recognised, we need to kind of split services for means of monitoring, making sure things are moving ahead. We need to look at how we can bring things together a little bit better for effective working when we're looking at improvement plans and that kind of change. There's a need to look at the direction development process to try and tie up the change work, budgets, workforce, and to clarify the links between these. And I think there was some feeling that there was, while there's maybe good work at the front line, that sometimes is kind of lost a little bit in the middle. And also there was a lot of call for clarifying and simplifying the kind of brand and message of the IJB and what the IJB is and what it does, which we do probably incorporate some sharing success, looking at the accessibility, visibility, a lot around participation engagement came out, and also a kind of clarity of roles, which comes up in my next presentation, which is around the scheme of integration. So I think the action plan work around those key points should be a really good kind of precursor to developing the next iteration of the plan. And I think the hard work really will be keeping that participation and conversation going as the plan comes into force. So it's not really just I suppose something that's revisited annually when we want to refresh a plan, but it's actually a dialogue that informs the process as we go along. And I'm happy to take any questions on that.
Thank you very much for that, Lucy. And can I just also say thank you very much for all the work you've put in over the period to get to this stage, because I appreciate it has been quite a process to get us to the stage we're at. So thank you for everything you've done to get
Thank you for participating.
I'll open it up for questions. I'll maybe start off just quickly. Maybe it's a question for Carl, because it's focused on the budget. I know it's not yet possible to fully align the budgeting process with the planning process. How far are we from that process, and what do we need to do to get there? And maybe Carl wants to come in on that one. Or Brian's got his hand up.
Okay, I was just about to speak, but Brian, you can go first.
Oh, well, yeah, okay, thanks. Thanks, Chair. I don't think we're far away, to be honest. We're now starting to have those conversations about the strategic plan now it's been reviewed and linking those to directions, and also with that, you know, we're starting to have those talks about budget setting for the next financial year, and then we're hoping that then that budget setting process is reflected in the directions and the cost attached to that direction moving forward. So I think in theory we're not that far away. It's just whether putting that theory into practice in alignment, whether we can do that before, you know, we're hoping directions would be issued prior to the start of the next financial year, and budgets will be set. So that's what I mean by in theory. I think we're not far away, and it will align then those workforce kind of requirements and any other kind of financial risk that we may need to have reflected in directions will be done between now and the end of the start of the new financial year. But maybe Carl will come in from a financial perspective.
Go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, thanks. I think what Brian is saying is right, but I think we'll only get this really up and running for possibly next year, because I think that the council is going to publish a change programme early 2021, and at the same time the NHS is going to introduce a project management office. So I really see that two things as being really kind of central to helping with the longer term redesign. So how I see this working as we go forward is that the medium term financial plan will sort of give us the financial envelope we need to operate in. So the strategic commissioning plan will then be informed by the medium term financial plan. So the strategic commissioning plan is like an ongoing live planning cycle, so that needs to be informed by the medium term financial plan. The surface plans will then need to be based on the strategic commissioning plan and also aim to reduce that funding gap we've got. So the PMO will need to be heavily involved with the surface managers as they start developing their surface plans that ultimately leads to the directions. And I think where we want to get is the directions will have projects within them that closes this financial gap, and then that'll lead on to a performance monitoring and management. So the whole thing will be a continuous cycle, but I think we really need to get the support in place to deliver this change programs, and I think that'll be the Council's refreshed change programme, and the PMO office will really drive that. So once that's up and running, I would see that continuous cycle of improvement as we go forward. But I don't think this year the directions is going to have that detailed smart plans in them that's going to reduce our funding, but there will be small steps forward.
Okay, thank you for that, Carl. So can I just go a little bit further with that then? So I appreciate that it's not something that's going to happen overnight, but this is something that we have been speaking about my entire time on the IJB. So how do we actually ensure that we are making the progress we need to make at every step, and that we're kept informed, that we are developing those steps so that we are in a position to align it all together.
I think
I come in. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. No, go ahead, Carl.
I was just going to say that I think that the IJB needs to really get involved in the budget seminars, and also when your budget's being presented for approval, then we need to really challenge areas where there's not enough funding, because that two-way discussion should happen at the budget setting point in time. If the money's not there to deliver the services as they stand, there should be that negotiation saying, but we can't deliver this services with this amount of money. So that's where the things should really become visible, and that's why the strategic commissioning plan, you really need to push for that to change to live within the finances. So we've never actually done that in the past. We've just approved the budget that that isn't sustainable and can't actually pay for the services delivered. So I think that negotiation process needs to be improved this year, and the IJB can drive that, because you have ultimate say in what budgets you're approving.
Okay, thank you. And Brian, I think you had your hand up as well.
Yeah, I think Carl said a lot of what we said. I was sort of aligning to, but I think also the directions as well, when we're drawing those up and we have a financial allocation to those directions, I think that's when we challenge, was it enough for what happened last year, and what has changed to make it enough this year, so that we're not really starting off the year with a forecast deficit, and we're having those conversations maybe before directions are issued to our partners in local authority and the health board. So I think those conversations are now starting to happen. We're starting to sort of have those kind of real discussions that would allow that to be implemented as a cycle that Carl's described. How IJB's kept up to date, I think it's just through seminars, briefings, and what we bring from directions perspective or performance perspective, because I think that's a big link to that we're trying to make as well. That then there's oversight and insight into what we're trying to do. But I think Elizabeth may want to come in as well.
Yeah, go ahead, Elizabeth.
I'm feeling slightly nervous about offering this, but as one of the managers of the project management office and in charge of planning as well, I'd like to offer in the new year a project plan and a timeline for when the IJB is going to see each element of this slotting into place, and I suppose what success might look like and what the timescale is for that. Do you think that would be a reasonable offer?
Yeah, I think that would be a wonderful offer, and I'd like to think other people might take that and think it's a good idea as well. Lucy, do you want to come in?
I was just going to say, I think from a strategic plan point of view, a key part of the discussions around directions is going to be making the plan and the priorities and the making them really meaningful for teams and managers, so that they can engage and see how they fit into the picture as a whole. And I suppose that fits in with the participation and engagement, which we want from the community, but we also need from our own services and teams, so that it really fits together and they're driving the change and kind of working to live within their means, and they really have that kind of creativity and innovation if we give them the room to and all the support they need to do it.
Thank you very much. I've got Joel wants to come in.
Thank you, Chair. It's just to say, I suppose, provide reassurance as well that we're not sitting still in the meantime, just waiting for the PMO office and the other improvement assistance to come along. So Brian and I have been having discussions with finance on the NHS side over this last week, and the feedback we're getting so far from our management accountants is that they think that's the best budget we've set so far. Obviously, it's got a way to go before it obviously works through and gets improved, but in terms of being a realistic budget, that's the feedback we're being given. And also that Lucy and I and information support are also we've already got dates in the diary to meet with every manager around starting work on the directions as well in readiness for next year. So we kind of got a lot of the information we need. It's, I think, when Brian talks about the theoretical bit, it is pressure of time on everybody to get it all drawn together. But I do think we've got the right components.
That's really good. Thank you very much for that, Jo. And I've got Jane next.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't intending to speak at all. So,
that's okay.
But while I'm here, just yeah, I agree, and it's the bit about the whole life funding as well, and I think that's, you know, keeping that perspective about that continuous one-stop shop kind of approach, and finance as well, you know, moving with the person. That's a long-term aspiration, but there will be the adult support and the adult social care review as well, and we don't know what's coming out of that, but I support that the plan does not need refreshed as it stands. I support that.
Thank you very much, Jane. Robbie?
Thank you very much, Chair. Can I come back to Carol and his challenges that if there ain't enough money for a project, we should be challenging them in the seminars. I'm still involved in the hard-nosed business world, and I've found it quite a culture shock when I became involved with the council and over the years with the NHS that budgets have a habit of drifting more than a little, and I share Emma's thoughts on these matters. So really I'm going to ask a daft lady question. How do we challenge if there ain't enough money in the pot for a particular service at a seminar? What do we challenge, the commissioning of that, or what? Sorry if this is a daft question, but I really feel we want to get to the bottom of this just now.
Who wants to come in on that point?
I'll come in.
Yeah.
Thanks, Robbie. Yeah, I think we all know there's not a lot of money in the pot. So I think if we follow the legislation through, what you're supposed to do as an IJB is say, well, we can't deliver what we've been delivering using that money, but we can deliver this. So that's the point, that you need to actually change your strategic commissioning plan to deliver services within that fund. So I think in practice, you'd probably go, what you've been doing for a while is going back to the officers and saying, can you give us proposals to show us what you can deliver within that funding?
Thank you very much for that, Carol. Okay, any further questions, members? John? Yeah?
Thank you very much, Chair. Really much a political statement as anything else here with regard to negotiation of budgets. This country, actually globally, we've encountered over a decade of austerity. I see a shift in this last year of what we can all see as being possible if there's a political will. Quite appropriately, there has been government intervention in order to offset or mitigate just the negative impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. Funds became available in order to support non-means tested furlough scheme, for example, provide various elements of financial support to uphold the economy, support businesses, and secure the income of families in order that they didn't default on mortgage payments, for example. And quite rightly so. What that tells me is that while there's a political will, there will be the ability in order to source funding, in order to tackle the other underlying elements just that cause disproportionate suffering within this country. If there was the political will, monies could be secured and released in order to alleviate childhood poverty, which we'll discuss today. Monies could be made available in order to find solution-focused addiction recovery service solutions. Monies could be available to eradicate homelessness. These are the things that we need to start negotiating with national government. When there's the political will to fund the money in order to offset the global pandemic, and as I say, rightly so. If there was the political will, they could and should, in my opinion, be tackling the underlying social problems that have been there prevalent, and actually just a national pandemic that preceded for decades COVID-19. And I hope that my political colleagues will engage accordingly with the relevant individuals at Holyrood and Westminster in order to bring that home to them. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, John. Just to come back on that, I appreciate what you're saying about getting additional funding. A lot of our challenges within our IJB are not all down to money. A lot of our challenges are down to our ability to staff many of the roles we have, and that doesn't come down to money. That goes down to lots of different things, but being able to fill some of the hard to fill roles are the challenges we have. We could have an additional X amount of money in the bank. It wouldn't solve our challenges, and it wouldn't mean that we don't have to redesign our services. We have to redesign them, some of them because they are no longer fitting in the world we now live in. Worlds change, we need to change with them. And I just don't think it's all down to money.
I agree, Chair. However, if you tackle the root cause and the social divide that takes place, the length and breadth of this country, Shetland included, eradicate childhood poverty, eradicate homelessness, eradicate the prevalence of addiction, then actually we won't even need to be filling these roles that we're struggling to fill, because the problem will be resolved at the root cause. And that now, a while ago, people may have said, oh, that socialist pie in the sky. Well, actually, the last year has evidenced that where there is a political will in order to alleviate suffering, money can be found. And for the long-term gain of society, for the long-term saving of the public purse, let's create a society whereby we don't have childhood poverty, we don't have just a high prevalence of addiction, particularly in the more impoverished parts of this country. Let's eradicate homelessness, and therefore we will not be in a position where we are struggling to fill particular posts in order to firefight such situations.
Those points are all very valid, but I would see those points as society changes. That's the whole community that needs to make those differences. That's not the role purely of this IJB. Everybody in Shetland needs to play their part to do all those things. But I note what you're saying. I'm going to let Brian in, and then we'll move on. Go ahead, Brian.
Thank you, Chair. Just to really add on to your words there, you know, the IJB is linked into, the forefront of our thoughts at the minute are the social determinants of health and care, and that's why we're linking into project boards like Anchor and community-led support, because that is the preventative and early intervention. That will then decrease the funding we have to put into actually people needing to access services, because it's a service provision that is the expensive bit, but the prevention bit is the cheap bit. So I would just like to reassure Councillor Fraser, you know, that we are engaged not just in service provision, but also in, you know, that work to understand and to try and input into those social determinants, which, you know, you've really outlined quite nicely. But I think that is a key role of the IJB as well. And I think at the minute, certainly in the meetings I'm attending, I think that's the forefront of everybody's thoughts as well.
Thanks for that, Brian. Okay, I'm not seeing anybody else with their hands up, and I'm keen that we do stay focused on what we're here to do today. So if we could just ensure that we're happy to note that the consultation on the refresh has taken place. And are we all happy to agree that there's no need to rewrite the strategic plan at this stage?
Yes.
And are we happy to approve the action plan in principle that has arisen from the consultation? Are we all happy to do all those things?
Yes.
Yep, I'm not seeing anybody say otherwise, so I'll take that as a yes. Okay, if we could move on then to item 7, which is the review of Shetland Islands Health and Social Care Partnership Integration Scheme, and that's Lucy again. Go ahead.
Thank you. So this is the update on the review of the statutory 5-year review of the integration scheme, which has overrun, as you may know. We did get assurance from the Scottish Government that the current scheme remains in force while we've done jointly reviewed and identified areas that need further work. So I think we're within kind of within the scope of that at the moment. The review process is underway. There hasn't been very much public engagement at all. I think probably because of the nature of the document, it's not really as tangible as the strategic plan, but they do link together. But there's been really good collaborative work between between the parties and support services. There's a draft attached that has changes that come up to around 2 weeks ago. There have been comments and queries since that require a bit of follow-up and more discussion and agreement between parties, so it's been really good at kickstarting that. And the changes in the document are detailed in the appendix 2, the table that's there. A lot of them are kind of tense changes, but there are a few key changes as well. And there's some difficulties in that the scheme was obviously written before integration took place. So the realities of how things would work out in practice were sometimes difficult to anticipate. So there are a few changes to practical ways of working that need to be updated. And it's been a good opportunity to cross-check our kind of reality of how things work in practice with the requirements of the scheme and look at areas that we need to address and focus on. Some of them which came up in the strategic plan as well. So the areas for further work that discussions are underway are around clinical and care governance, workforce and organisational development section, participation and engagement, information sharing and data handling, and also a review of all the supplementary documentations that do tie into a few of those areas anyway. So it's kind of prompted some helpful discussions around processes, which I think will lead to improvement. So it's not really just for the sake of updating the scheme. And also I think the need to kind of support teams with the time to change and evolve and kind of work on those core bits of integration. The key suggested changes have been around, well, a few of the suggested changes, an update of the vision and streamlining of the aims for a bit of clarity and accessibility of the document for people kind of, I suppose, interacting with IJB. There's a proposal to include public health and AHP representation on the IJB as non-voting members, which I think fits well with our with the move towards prevention and early intervention. Work around organisational and workforce development, referring to the development protocol plan that's been produced, so that'll kind of kickstart some more work. And there's some discussion around the inclusion of health improvement as a service, but I suppose from a culture change point of view, crucially around health improvement as a function of all the services that are commissioned. So we've gotten, the aim is to have the review finalised and the draft approved by all parties by the end of the financial year, which will take a bit of work over this coming few months, but I'm confident that discussions are underway and hopefully that should be doable. Thank you.
Thank you very much on that, Lucy. Just a quick question before I open it up to everybody else. The IJB, is it going to come to the IJB on the 25th of March then? Will it be ready for that?
That is a good question. Brian's leaping in.
That would have been my hope, and that's what I was going to discuss at the item on the business planner. That would probably just give us enough time, but would be before it's the last IJB before the 31st of March, which we're now predicting is the end point for this bit of work.
Yeah, that's fine. I suppose we're going to have to make it kind of a priority that it does come, because it was meant to be completed by the end of this year. So from an audit perspective, I think we need to really make that a huge priority that it does come on the 25th of March. Okay, I'll open it up for questions. Christine, do you want to come in on that?
Thank you, Chair. It was just to say that in terms of meeting those deadlines, I mean, I've had really good discussions with Lucy about this, and the supplementary documentation that she mentioned in many ways is the much bigger piece of work. So I think the integration scheme itself, the biggest piece of work, just as Lucy mentioned, is about consultation. And I think in particular, the changes that are being proposed around the vision and the wording to make it accessible is where that wider public consultation would actually be a really good focus in terms of community. But I think I would support what Brian and Lucy are saying, that we can work together on this, and I think the 25th of March is entirely doable, but there might be some further changes to the supplementary documentation that would follow. But it's the scheme itself that is key at the moment, to set the scene as well for the detail in the supplementary documentation. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Thank you for highlighting that, Christine. Any further questions on this? No, I'm not seeing any hands up. Any comments? No. Oh, yeah, Jim, go ahead.
Can I come back to what Robbie asked before about putting excuse me, a pharmacist as a non-voting member as well? Robbie raised that a while ago. Since a lot of the work we're doing, pharmacy is involved.
I can certainly add that as a proposal as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Any further comments, Jim?
So that's it. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so we've been asked to note the review has commenced and note that the target date for the completion of the review is now by the end of the financial year. Are we all happy to do that? Yep. Okay, that's it. So we move on to item 8, which is the annual Child Poverty Action Report, and that's Lucy again.
This is my last one, I'm sure you'll be glad to hear. Okay. So really the ask is really just for the IJB to note this second annual Child Poverty Action Report that's been produced by the SIC and the NHS Shetland. So the kind of key points within the report is that work to tackle child poverty in Shetland is really the responsibility of all of us. So I suppose that's why we're taking it to the IJB does have a line within the strategic plan that will support the production of the plan and also the work that goes along with it. So all of us as citizens, professionals, organisations and people kind of with influence within our own spheres of wherever we're operating. The Shetland Islands Council and NHS Shetland have a statutory duty to report on activity that's been undertaken to tackle child poverty. This is the second year of the report. It's been delayed from kind of end of financial year with publication in summer because of the pandemic, both because of capacity and also for a chance to capture the work that's happened. It's obviously been kind of, I suppose, accelerated and magnified because of the pandemic. The work that's done is brought together under the money priority of the Shetland Partnership Plan. And while child poverty levels over kind of as they're measured nationally over the last few years have been fairly static in Shetland, then relatively low. They kind of notably haven't been improving over recent years. And also when we look at our high cost of living and also the recent situation, it's likely that a lot more people are in financial hardship than we realise. So there's there's work within the plan and the activity around gathering that kind of evidence. There are 8 sort of key areas of work that the report is split into, which sounds like a lot, but I think it's, if you haven't had a chance to read it, it is fairly readable. And there are lots of case studies to illustrate and really kind of bring the work to life and illustrate the picture of things that have been going on. There's still a lot of work to do around increasing awareness and decreasing stigma and really tackling the drivers of child poverty, which kind of links back to a lot of what John was saying earlier. But there's been a lot of good work around the kind of, I suppose, the work for mitigating the effects of child poverty, and the kind of the work on the drivers is also ongoing. And if you kind of have a hop through the report, then there's lots of really good examples from linking with the Anchor project, who we heard from earlier, and around free school meals, and the provision of that is obviously has been highlighted through the pandemic, but was a project that was ongoing over holiday periods towards the end of last year. And there's some really good feedback from families around the difference that's made for them. There's been a lot of support for families over the period of lockdown in terms of kind of emergency food parcels and how to make those more accessible and people able to access those kinds of things with some dignity and choice, and linking that to schools rather than only being available through food banks, etc. Some work around childcare, which obviously has a knock-on for parents and families working, and also kind of engagement with young people through the Open project, and also the wider community through the Voices for Equity project that some of you may have been involved with or might have heard outcomes from. And there are kind of quick highlights if anybody has any points or questions.
Thank you very much for that, Lucy. And I have been part of the Voices for Equity project, and I thought it was a really good project. I'm also part of the Voices for Change project, which is equally as important. I'll open it up for questions, members. Just give people a moment if there's anybody online who has any questions. I don't have any questions because I've seen this at 2 council meetings, so I've asked all my questions previously. I think colleagues are the same. Jane.
Thank you. I have read the report, and it's excellent the way it shows moving forward. It is worth reiterating the 1 in 7 children in Shetland. I think that in poverty, taking away housing is it may be low across Britain standards, but that is still a statistic that needs to be wider understood and looked at. And also coming back to the creating in Bray, it's interesting the CAOs, I forget what's the anchor organisations, the community anchor organisations, and I'm just hoping that they will be also involved. I'm sure they will be, but they'll be involved in the Bray hub moving forward. But thank you.
Yeah, I think on that kind of point of kind of joined up working, that's been a really positive outcome of the pandemic, especially around I suppose the child poverty has been a really urgent issue when it's around food and managing to be able to kind of provide for a family. So it's really brought lots of services together with a common goal, which is kind of led to the continuation of a community resilience forum that had been seen as a pandemic response, but it's actually going to carry on kind of over into the future through community planning. So it's one of the definite positives of the pandemic is that co-working and really bringing to fore community and third sector organisations.
that's excellent. And you know, the eradication of the need for food banks, but the eradication that that's not normalised, that food bank isn't a normal. I think that's fits very well with the aspirations of the IJB's strategic plan and the poverty plan.
Thank you very much, Jane. Any further questions, anybody? Any comments? I'm not seeing anybody in the room with comments. I think we all, you know, we're all behind this plan. And like you were saying, Lucy, it really has highlighted some of the working across services that's happened in the pandemic and how we can use that going forward for the benefit of the whole of Shetland. So I thank everybody for this report. I really like the fact that there's people's stories in it. It just makes it much more real when you're reading it. It's not just facts and figures. This is people's lives. This is what people are living with. And I think sometimes living in Shetland, we maybe forget that. And even before COVID, these were issues of people's lives. So we need to use that and make some progress with it. So if we've not got any further comments, we're happy to note the annual Child Poverty Action Report. Yep, happy to do that. Okay, we will move on. Thank you very much, Lucy. And we'll move on to item 9, which is COVID-19 Remobilisation Plan update, and that is Brian.
Thank you, Chair. This is just an update on the current remobilisation plan, which was submitted to Scottish Government on the 31st of July this year. That plan outlaid some priorities for the recovery and remobilisation of services, namely having a good test and protect structure, building on our e-health infrastructure, developing a strong communication strategy, building on innovative and new ways of working, and recovering the whole system holistically. Maybe just to highlight some areas linked to the priorities and success and what we're doing good on the remobilisation front. An example being a test and protect team in October had 8 new cases. They had 51 contacts who were all traced and contacted within 24 hours. Our flu immunisation programme was expanded and it's well underway, and the COVID vaccination programme has started today. And I believe the first vaccinations been given while we've been in IJB. Use of near-me consultations continue in a lot of services, aligning to that e-health infrastructure, and it's becoming the norm. And Ask My GP, which is a contact service for Lerwick Health Centre, has been discussions about scaling up across the system. Cross-service working has had a positive effect on delayed discharges, and care at home services are introducing a 3rd overnight team to prevent admissions to residential care. Acute services have reconfigured to sustain a COVID-19 unit, and they're returning to elective work as well. We do have to acknowledge there are some areas with slower recovery trajectories. Dentistry, day services support and short breaks, namely some of those examples. But a lot of that is underpinned by the current national guidance, which we are adhering to keep our patients and clients as safe as possible. Scottish Government have asked for an update to the existing plan, which is to cover financial year 21-22. The priorities have changed slightly, where it needs to be a whole system approach. It needs to have citizen perspective and participation. It needs to acknowledge interdependencies and partnership working, and it needs to address inequalities. So really, we're building on the renewal work that we've already completed and undertaken, examples of which are urgent care redesign, digitisation of services, optimisation of prevention, early intervention and self-care. The planning is just starting to commence for this update to the plan, and we're hoping that we can link that planning with the setting of directions for that actual financial year as well. Happy to take any questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Brian. Okay, we'll open it up for questions. None in the room. Let's see if there's any online. I don't see any hands up. I think it's just recognising that it's constantly changing process and everything's always changing. So what we see before us now is not necessarily going to remain the same going forward. So I think we just need to be aware of that. I'm not seeing any comments? No? But offer that one lightly, Brian. We can move on. Okay, so we've been asked to note the progress in the current remobilisation plan with respect to delegated services. Been asked to approve the drafting of an updated version of the remobilisation plan. We're all happy to do that. And are we happy to approve that the Chief Officer acts as the IJB representative in this planning process? Yep. Is everybody happy with that? Okay, that's fine. We will move on then to item 10, which is care home fire risk assessments, and that's Christine Ferguson to present.
Thank you, Chair. This is actually a joint report from myself and the Chief Officer. However, I'll do the first introduction, and then I'm sure Brian will come in on the back of that. Essentially, this report is providing the background and an update regarding the process that we've been following with regard to fire risk assessments in care home settings in Shetland. This is in response to concerns raised on the back of fire risk assessment work done in the council. You'll see in the report that 3 homes have had detailed fire risk assessments, and there's comprehensive information regarding the additional measures that could be undertaken in those care homes to further enhance measures against fire. Some of the actions have already been taken, and some minor works have been included in future maintenance programmes. There was a seminar for all members of the IJB and elected members of the council recently, where Keegan's presented the detailed finding work, and in the discussion then the representative from Keegan's assured everybody that the standard in Shetland's care homes is very high, and he was very complimentary about the facilities, about the preventative measures in place, and also of the staff and their approach to fire risks. He said that we meet all the current legislation requirements. However, the legislation has changed, so new builds have to apply different measures. So the question now is very much to what extent we try to retrofit existing care home settings with that other range of measures, particularly some major works that might be required in terms of fitting misting or sprinkler systems, doing adjustments to ceilings in the buildings, and also loft partitions. So there was a further seminar of the IJB around strategic planning, and this report is very much seeking the views of the IJB in terms of the future for care home services in Shetland in light of the strategic plans of the IJB and the likely directions that would follow, given that the IJB issues directions which then result in the council providing these services or commissioning them from others. So that's just a very brief introduction. I was present at the first seminar and can answer questions regarding council's involvement, but I think in terms of the second seminar and the IJB's position and role, then Brian may wish to add something to my introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Do you want to go ahead, Brian?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Christine, for introducing the paper. I think the IJB just needs to be just acknowledge just the ask of them from the paper and the fact that it revolves around the strategic visioning of this care provision. And I think where we are today with the strategic plan refresh being presented to board and being approved, that it sort of sets that strategic direction to start the kind of visioning of what services could look like moving forward. I would also just like to note as well the complexity that this service provision now sits in. in the fact that shifting balances of care is very much codependent on the community-led support piece, the SDS piece, the care at home piece. So I think I just wanted to highlight the complexity of when we're forming a vision that a lot of these bigger projects are kind of all interlinked that will play into that kind of strategic vision. So I think that's probably just what I just wanted to introduce in alignment with the paper that's been presented to the board this morning.
Thank you very much for that, Brian. Okay, members, I'll open up for questions. I've got Natasha with her hand up.
Thanks, Chair. I'll leave off my camera because my internet's dipping a bit. Hope you can hear me clearly. In regard to 1.1 and 1.2 in the actions required section, I have no issue to note as requested. However, with regard to 1.3, I don't personally think that the IJB are in a position to provide the council with a full response at this time, and that is purely because of the work that we as a board are currently undertaking around the strategy for this care group. I would suggest, rather than replying in full at 1.3, that we could perhaps assure the council that we are undertaking this work and that we will provide them with a full response once the board have agreed our intent as to the direction of travel.
Thank you for that, Natasha. I'll just look to other members to see if anybody else has a view on that. Jane, and nodding your head.
Yeah. I would support that.
I'm looking at my colleagues in the room. Are we in support of that approach? Yes, Robbie.
Thank you, Chair. I would support that as well, but would it be in order to request that this be time limited, that there be a date put on that, or is the workload going to be too severe to allow that?
I personally would suggest that we don't limit ourselves to a timeline, because this is a big piece of work, and I think the fact that we're starting this piece of work is important, but I don't think we should rush it, and it should be done properly. That would be my opinion, but I'm happy to hear from other people. What timeline would you like to set?
I just don't want this to be an ongoing project that goes on for a long time. I have no timeline in mind. I would totally support what you're saying, that it has to be done properly, but would look to officers for some guidance on that.
Okay. Do you want to come back in, Brian, at all?
Thanks, Chair. I would be in agreement. One of the things we did learn from COVID was that to do change, we needed to really take our time to plan and reflect on where we've come from and what we've done and where we're heading to. So, I would be keen as well to align with the Chair's thoughts that we, take the time to get the outcomes that are sustainable and wholesome. Consider right across the system rather than just being honed in one specific area at this time.
Thank you. Christine?
Thank you, Chair. I totally understand and appreciate the issues. I suppose in terms of a timeline, again, I totally understand that, and there are so many complex and diverse pressures that are coming our way. COVID peaks, Brexit, winter weather, and on we go. So I totally get that. I'm just thinking that there may be an opportunity, and again, be happy to discuss this with the Chief Officer if the IJB feel this would be appropriate, whether we could come up with what is perhaps a projected timeline that looks a bit more at these care settings in terms of just the sort of time frame for these buildings. We do have condition surveys and so on, and building maintenance programs, so we could work on information in that regard and feed that into your processes, not necessarily through a formal meeting, but in terms of the work that will go on in behind the scenes. And perhaps we could provide then an update report within a certain time frame, so that people can see that there's actually progress being made, not just in terms of your strategic plan, which is very much the IJB matter, but certainly progress in getting a better understanding of the actual resources that are available for this part of that very complex picture that I've heard described this morning. So just whether an update report would be helpful, and I think a commitment to do some more work in the meantime regarding the condition of the resources that are currently available in this regard. So if that would be helpful, thank you.
Thank you, Christine. I think that would be really helpful. I think Robbie's nodding his head in agreement. So,
if I can come in,
yeah,
Chair, thank you, Mrs. Ferguson. That ticks all the boxes for me. And if the Chair and other members are minded, I certainly would support such a proposal.
Yeah, so that sounds good. So we'll take that away as an action to do. Any further questions on this one, members? Any comments? No. So we are happy with 1.1 to note, consider and discuss the information provided in this report. Happy at 1.2 to note that the work is in hand to address the recommendations made in the reports from Keegan's. And I think Christine has highlighted that a lot of those have already been progressed or are being progressed at the moment. We had quite a lot of reassurance from Keegan's at the seminar that the services that we do have are actually incredibly good services. We've got really good staff who are really good at what they do. Therefore, we've had a lot of assurance with that. And we are going to, at 1.3, advise the council that we are going to come back with a plan. Does that sound right? Yeah, is that okay? Okay, well, I'm not seeing anybody say otherwise, so we'll go with that. Okay, so we will move on to item 11, which is non-voting member appointments to IJB, and Jan is going to present on that one.
Thank you, Chair. May I first apologise for appearing in person today, but I was in and around the Town Hall on other business just at the commencement of the meeting, and there was no other way to take myself away and be virtual. So I'm here in person today and sitting at your table. In terms of this report, item 11 on the agenda, this is it is a relatively straightforward report, essentially confirming the appointment of a senior clinician, local acute sector representative. And the name of the nominee is Dr. Alice Einarsson. So I'll come on to that being the decision that's required. What I would say is that the pursuit sometimes of appointments is a somewhat difficult task, and I know the Chief Officer is engaged in that, and the report identifies a couple of other vacancies that he's actively pursuing nominations for. One of the practical or tactical practices that the board has adopted is the appointment, where they can, of a substitute to support the formal member of the board. And I would advocate that that's a good idea going forward for all members of the board. And the NHS has responded positively in that respect, appointing substitutes for voting members, as has the council, and one or two of your other non-voting representative bodies have done the same. A couple of advantages flow from that. The first is that it takes something of a pressure off an individual's personal attendance at each and every meeting of the IJB, because there's always a substitute in the background to fill that spot. And secondly, because you have an identified substitute, when we run training events and seminars that update members, it's an opportunity for that substitute also to be similarly briefed, and therefore to be an active and able member whenever they are required to substitute. So I'm putting that forward. It's not a part of the report, but I put that forward as just an additional support to the ongoing process of trying to fill your vacancies. In relation to this specific report, it is identifying the fortuitous and good position of having a nominee now as a member for your senior clinician local acute sector representative, and I would commend that nomination to you for appointment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan. Do we have any questions? No questions? Any comments?
Happy to approve.
Happy to approve. Okay, thank you for that, Jane. I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Pauline Wilson for all her work and contributions and her time on the IJB. I think she's been a real benefit, so I'd like to thank her personally for that and welcome the new representation, who I think will also do a great job. So we're happy to note that and approve. If we move on to item 12, which is Jan again, and that's the IJB Code of Conduct consultation.
Thank you very much, Chair. In relation to this report, I address the board as your standards officer. At your last meeting, the Chief Officer indicated that one area that had been highlighted for review as part of your governance, overall governance review, would be checking again that your Code of Conduct was up to date. At that meeting, I indicated that fortuitously reviews of the model scheme for devolved bodies was also being looked at by the Standards Commission and by the Scottish Government. We as standards officers and another club that I'm part of is the monitoring officers for local authorities have been actively involved in the proposed changes to councillor codes of conduct and the devolved scheme. What this report identifies is that, first and foremost, although there's 2 months left to run on that consultation, in fact, your own diary would not have permitted of a standard meeting of the IJB within that time frame. And so I would also apologise for the late submission of this report, but it was felt that it was better to be late and timely than not considered at all as a consultation document. If I can draw your attention to paragraph 4.3 in the report. What that does there is draws out in a list many of the general and substantive changes that the new code proposes. I think that one that affects pretty much every provision in the code is the change of it from a list of do's and don'ts and setting basic standards to it being rewritten in the first person, which provides that essentially on undertaking to be bound by the code, then each and every member of the IJB on a personal level accepts that this is their commitment and promise to be governed by the ethical standards that the code represents. And I think that is a major shift. I qualify that, of course, by saying that this board has never had a complaint or indeed even a representation made in terms of any member stepping in any way outside the confines of the code and the practice and standards that it presents. But nevertheless, the code is there for guidance and it assists board members. So the existing code in being modernised by these proposed changes, I think will set the scene as a far more modern and updated code going forward. And what is of optimal benefit to you is the fact that it's bringing into effect will take place before your review of your code is completed. So I think the timeline for this goes hand in glove, and as I say, it's very opportune for the board that it should be before you just now. In terms of the proposals as presented to you, I, as your officer, have got no particular suggestion in terms of advice as to how you might either comment or deviate from the proposals as presented to you. But I am, of course, prepared to respond to any questions today and also to take forward any ideas that your members may have in terms of improvements to it or querying the reason or need for changes to be made. I would also, just before finishing, Chair, would like to point to a couple of other elements of the changes in the report that I think are matters that on an ongoing basis you receive advice from the corporate service provision and from your Chief Officer and Chief Finance Officer on an ongoing basis. And that's the distinction when you're dealing with integrated boards like this particular integration joint board between the decision makers and the officers who have to implement the decisions that you make and who have to act on operational matters on your behalf in the day job. And sometimes what makes that a wee bit more complicated for the board is the fact that you are composed of decision makers of two of the partners to the local partnership. But you also have a great number of members who, as non-voting members, can be officers who also act on an operational level. And sometimes it's necessary to keep that focus on accountability. Within the code, there's a specific paragraph that invites board members to always bear in mind that your strategic role is predominantly strategic, and the code makes it now a provision for that and invites members not to participate on an individual or collective basis in involving yourself directly in operational matters. And then in paragraph 3.10. Of the proposed code, there's a rewording of the need for the board to recognise the taking of corporate responsibility for your decisions. And what that essentially means and how it's translated is that on an individual basis, the undertaking that your members make is that even in respect of decisions that they do not particularly individually agree with, they will find themselves bound by the decisions that you make and will not act in a way that is at odds with that. It's an interesting provision, and I must say that we as lawyers have agonised somewhat over it, because what it does or can do is bring you in potential conflict with your entitlement to apply freedom of expression as individuals. And that tension will have to continue because the law supporting both propositions continues. But what the code does is indicate what the expectation would be in terms of taking that corporate responsibility. And I think that is an enhancement and enables the behaviours of individual members to be tested against that provision. So beyond that, I would commend the fact that there is a review ongoing, that in time the proposals will be put to the Scottish Parliament for approval, and then a new code will be issued. What I undertake as your standards officer is to produce a report immediately on the back of that, so that your code will not at any point be out of step with the parliamentary approved new model code. The one thing I would mention is that with the Scottish Parliament elections looming, I'm not sure that sufficient time will be found to approve this before the Parliament goes into recess. But I know the Scottish Government's commitment is and has always been to ensure that there are up-to-date standards. So I suspect that this is not in any way a proposal that will be kicked into the long grass. On that note, I'd be prepared to take any questions. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Neil. Okay, members, do we have any questions? None in the room. Any online? Or any comments? No, I'm not seeing any. I think it all seems fairly straightforward from what I can see of it, and I think we would all be happy, from what I can gather, to note the current consultation and to confirm the forthcoming review of the Shetland IJB Code of Conduct will be completed when it's completed. Okay, we're happy with that.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so we'll move on to item 13, which is the IJB Business Programme and Action Tracker. And Brian?
Thank you, Chair. This is just a presentation of the next couple of meetings, business for the IJB on the 18th of February and the 25th of March. I think there is still a little bit of planned business to be scheduled. If we maybe run through that, the performance management group terms of reference and the performance management group, I actually think that can now be swept up in the scheme of integration review. So I might have that conversation with Lucy Flaws and Christine Ferguson about whether that would be situated a little bit better just in that review. The rotational nursing model, we can bring that for an update in February. We felt that at the moment there wasn't enough meat on the bone to really stimulate any sort of discussion or debate at the minute, and it's still just work ongoing, but it's at the early stages. Service recovery, we've kind of had that discussion today about the remobilisation plan, but what I can do is maybe once the draft the plan's updated, I can bring that to IJB, probably that'll be February. A communication strategy still to go on, and I'm thinking that will go in February. Workforce plan will probably be March, and we've also got the transition work in March. I'm just wary there's a lot of finance just in February, and it's the budget setting and the final IJB budget. So I anticipate there will be quite a bit of discussion around that. And I'm also cognizant that we need to do some of the direction setting at some stage, and I'm just wondering if we need to set aside a separate special meeting or IJB meeting for those directions, bearing in mind how long it took this year and we had to split it up over 2 sessions. It might be worth just putting a consolidated date in the diary for the whole direction process to be done. But I offer that to the board as suggestions, and ask if there's any more work they would like to see coming on the business plan.
I see Carl has his hand up. Carl, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks. Just quickly, for the meeting in February, then the IJB medium-term financial plan will be going up as well at that meeting, and we can pick off the IJB budget progress report because the final budget should be going up at that meeting. So we're not needing the progress report as well. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Carl. I was going to ask about the progress report and then the budget. It did seem to not be very aligned. I do have some concerns regarding that February meeting. If that meeting is only at 3 o'clock and it is for the budget and it is for the medium-term financial plan, I don't think there's a benefit to bring those other items to it because I think they'll get lost. So I think what you're saying, Brian, about having to have a special meeting to cover those things is probably the best approach, because I think the meeting's at 3 o'clock because it's for the accounts, and I think we need to focus on them at that meeting. That would be my suggestion.
Totally acknowledge that, Chair. I think, yeah, with it being a 2-hour meeting as well, are you happy I take that off table and have those discussions with Liesl and her team just to have a look at dates in the diary and how we just reconfigure that?
Yeah, no, that sounds like a good plan to me. Everybody else happy with that?
Yep.
Yep. Not seen anybody say otherwise.
Yep.
Good. Okay, did you want to carry on, Brian? Was there anything else you wanted to add?
We'll just review the action tracker, but just to say a lot of the actions that were raised at the last meeting are just actions ongoing, and I just with clearance and things, I didn't get a chance to update that, so I will undertake those actions and then update for the next presentation. But you know, things like the annual report being presented and some of the winter plan still in draft, and once that's formulated I'll send that out to members probably as a briefing just prior to the festive period.
That's really helpful, thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions on the business programme or the action tracker? No, there's nothing in the room. Anything online? Jane?
Just to say, today, you know, there was a very big agenda, but we have benefited of the seeing all the reports as together. I think that's really useful, and there was comment from some of the presenters as well that had been useful. So I think that although it looks like a big, you know, it is really useful seeing these reports in together as the whole systems, and the break, you know, building in that break certainly enables the meeting to be of this length, but also manageable. So that was just a comment about the agenda today.
Thanks for that, Jane. I think that's a really good point. There's some things that are just make more sense seeing them together. So I think we have to make sure we do that going forward. Do we have any other comments or questions on this? No, so are we, lost my page, are we being asked just to approve this going forward, and we'll leave, approve the business plan, and we're going to look at another date for a special meeting, and we'll get dates out to that before Christmas, will we? Maybe? Yeah, we will. That's fine. Okay, so that concludes the business for the meeting today. Thank everybody for all their time. Thank you for your contributions. And before we go, I just want to say I hope everybody has a lovely Christmas and manages to have some relaxing time, and special thanks to everybody who's working across health and social care over the Christmas period. They've had a really difficult year, and I think Christmas is not going to be like some Christmases will have been. So I'd just like to thank all of them especially for the time that they've given up this year and will continue to do so. So I hope everybody has a very safe and peaceful time. So thank you very much, and that concludes our business today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Emma.
Thank you.
Thank you.